Hello and welcome to the 83rd episode of Fur, Fins, and Feathers. Our guest, Tony Dejesus of Big Blue Bug Solutions, has returned. Welcome, and we're going to talk about wildlife now.
Yes, thank you for having me back.
I'm glad to see you again.
You know, I know you had mentioned to me before that one of the problems they've been having here locally are things with fisher cats. Or the
Fisher cats,
yep.
yes.
Yeah, the fisher
Talk
is the
about
name.
fisher cats.
Yeah, it's a mean little animal. I got to say, it's in the weasel family, and it's an animal that can be up to 4 feet long with the tail. Not a heavy animal, weighs about 13 or 14 pounds, but with razor-sharp claws and sharp teeth, and is an incredible fighter. It is one of the few animals that'll take on a porcupine. You know, most animals want nothing to do with the porcupine because of the quills. Fisher cat has no fear of a porcupine. Will literally, and it bites at its face until the porcupine kind of loosens up, and then it'll attack the belly. But it is a severe animal as far as our pets. You've got to be very careful, particularly people with cats and small dogs. You know, they can, because that to them is an animal of prey. You have rabbits, even skunks they will go after, small mice, rodents outside. So our cats and our dogs are just a little bit bigger than them, but the fisher cat, again, will take on those if your dog is small. Now, if you've got a big dog, if you've got like a Great Bernese or a St. Bernard or a Collie, it's not going to mess with those. Those are a little bit too big for it. But a small dog, a Chihuahua, or a small, like a mini Dachshund like I have, you know, those are an animal that a fisher cat would go after, would not think twice about going after. So you've got to really be careful with them.
Now, are they nocturnal?
For the most part, fisher cats are very active right at dusk and then right again at dawn. And again, they're going out looking for food. And over the past maybe 7 or 8 years, we started to get a lot more phone calls about fisher cats or the fisher. And I started to think, why? Why all of a sudden are we getting all these calls? What has created the problem with them? Well, I think a couple of things. I said with wildlife in general, but particularly the fisher, is that number one, we're taking better care of the environment. I mean, there were a lot of environmental laws came in for pollution, polluting our rivers and waterways and things. So things are cleaning up. We're doing a lot better. A lot of laws were passed to prevent trapping of animals, or only during certain seasons, and hunting of animals only during certain seasons. So the populations have allowed to kind of bloom and get bigger. On the other side, we've kind of built a lot more too now. We're encroaching on their home, their territory, knocking down trees, taking out forest areas to build plats and shopping areas and things. And now all of a sudden, those creatures that were always in the woods now have to come out and they look for food. They're hunting, they're looking for a place to take up residence, hollow trees, things like sheds or under sheds, under porches, places that they can hide and breed and live in. They're a fascinating creature. They're one of the few animals that their back paw rotates 180 degrees. So they can come down a tree head first, safely come down the tree head first. Their reproduction is another fascinating thing. They have an implantation system that is done. Their mating season is usually April and May, March and April rather, so we're just coming out of it. So the female is fertilized, but the embryo doesn't start to grow for 10 months. So the embryo really doesn't start growing until January and February, so the young are born March and April, and then she's able to get pregnant again. But she actually is inseminated, impregnated in March or April, and then doesn't actually start growing the embryo until 10 months later.
They are a very vicious creature, aren't they?
They really are. Their claws are sharp, their teeth are sharp. They have virtually no fear. I mean, and the other thing that's allowed them to kind of proliferate in our area is that they have not a lot of natural enemies. Maybe the coyote, but there's not a lot of enemies. And if you have some areas where you have bobcat and things like that, yeah, they would take on a fish. But for the most part, that fisher has no enemies. An eagle that might see it, but they're not usually flying at night or right early in dusk. So eagles, maybe an owl, a good-sized owl. But even that, the fish is such a good fighter.
Are the fishes protected?
They are protected for certain areas. Yeah, they almost went to extinction years ago, back in the early, before the turn of the century. Their fur, particularly the female's fur, is very soft and dense and was valued. The problem with them versus the mink is that fishes, again, are so mean and so vicious, you can't really raise them. They're not an animal you can raise and feed and take care of, which is also why you never see fishes usually in zoos.
And you certainly wouldn't pet one.
No, you definitely don't. And that's a general rule of thumb, for all wildlife, Brian. You don't want, and that's the other thing that, animal lovers, people who watch our show, Fur Fins and Feathers, they're animal lovers. And they see an animal outside, oh, look at that poor, look at that poor raccoon, look at that poor coyote, look at, let me throw some meat out for it, no, you don't want to do that. Because that kind of gets them used to coming to your property. And plus, you're taking away some of its natural hunting instincts. And all of a sudden, it becomes used to being around man, and that's not what you want. So, there are laws. You're not supposed to feed wildlife. There are laws against that. So you got to, it's okay to feed the birds, but the other animals, the coyotes, the fishes, the raccoons, you don't want to feed them at all.
Our next point of contention, not contention, but we need to learn more about raccoons.
Yeah, raccoons they're a fascinating animal, and everybody likes raccoons. They got that cute face with the little mask on them, and you see them if you watch them feed. Their hands, they'll pick food up in their hands and feed on it, and they're dexterous. They can take things apart. But like anything else, raccoons can create problems around our homes. And again, you got a small dog that goes after a raccoon. That raccoon will defend itself and is an incredible fighter too, much like the fisher cat. It's not as aggressive as the fisher, but again, they're going to come after things. So you've got to be very careful with them in your yard. People should be wary of their trees and branches, keeping them trimmed from their home as much as possible. Give yourself at least 3 or 4 feet away so the animals can't jump or climb, or you're not leaving a bridge for animals to climb onto your house from. Your chimneys, you may want to consider, and it's not a costly expense, but getting a chimney cap. You can install it yourself or have it professionally installed, and that protects your chimney. And even if you like to burn your fireplace, you have no trouble burning the fireplace. The embers go up, they can get out with no problem at all, but animals can't get in. And animals like raccoons, opossums, birds, and squirrels will take up residence in our chimney. And one of the problems is if you don't know they're there, and now they've brought nesting material in, they've brought their leaves and their twigs and things like that, whatever else they can find to make their nest with, and now you burn the fire in the fireplace and those embers go up, all of a sudden you've got a chimney fire and create major problems. So, a chimney cap is a worthwhile investment. It's something people should consider doing to prevent wildlife from their homes. But, sometimes with wildlife, we can be our worst enemies. When you're storing your trash, if you're putting your trash out just in a trash bag and putting it out on the street, where you live, if you're allowed to do that, don't put it out until the next morning. Don't leave it out overnight where the nocturnal animals, the things like the fishes, the raccoons, they can come and tear it apart.
And they do.
And they do, and they will. And now you've got a mess to clean up. And again, they get used to it. And in particular neighborhoods, certain neighborhoods where people do this on a regular basis, it'll also breed rats, where rats will come out at night and do the same thing. It's a perfect breeding ground for them. And there are videos, you can go online and see rats in New York, where you see garbage bags that are put out on the street. And you look at the bag and it's moving because 4 or 5 rats are in that bag. They ignored a hole in it. They're in the bag eating all the garbage, particularly like that restaurants would throw out on the streets that didn't have dumpsters.
That's a meal for them.
It certainly is, and we're creating the problems. And just like, our yards, as we try to get more natural in things, sometimes, you say, oh, I want to keep my yard, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to trim a lot of stuff, I want to keep it more natural. Well, the problem there is that's making it more natural for the animal. You want to have some space, some airflow between your plants, between your shrubs. You should be able to look between your shrubs and see foundation areas. If everything is so dense, that means the predators for things of mice and rats and small animals can't see them either. And it's a perfect breeding area for them, a perfect place for them to hide. And now, again, we're not putting our trash out properly. We're creating a problem. Our gas grills are another thing that can be a problem. If you don't clean them properly, you're not emptying out the grease traps, you're not doing the things you should be doing there, can also be a problem where mice and animals will try to get up inside them.
Coyotes.
Yeah.
So in Swansea, we have had sightings, many sightings of coyotes.
And it's interesting because, when you think about it, and, we're probably close to the same age. We grew up with, as kids, I mean, we never had coyotes in our area. We never had turkeys. We never had deer. You know, you were lucky if you saw rabbits every now and then, and maybe a pheasant or some quail. You know, but again, we've created a good environment for them. But one of the problems now is that people tend to see this coyote and think of it as like a dog, you know, and they'll put food out for it. Or maybe, even worse, they leave their dog food out. People that keep their dogs tied up in the yard, they'll leave a food bowl and a water bowl out in the yard. They don't take it in at night, they leave it there, and animals will come and feed on that. The coyote is a natural hunter, so they'll hunt rabbit, they'll hunt fox, they'll hunt small birds, they'll hunt small rodents. And one of the things that people are getting into now that also creates some of the problems with the fisher is that a lot of people are getting into raising chickens in their yard.
Yes.
You know, that's become a big thing now, and particularly during the pandemic, you know, people wanted another hobby to look for, something and they started bringing chickens into their yard, and whether they let them run free or they have a coop, unless you properly take care of that, unless you store the food properly and things, and you don't have a coop that's not well reinforced, and I mean with good, heavy mesh screening, a tight screening. You know, if you just put that little chicken wire up, a lot of these animals will just pry it through, and just, especially the fisher will just pry it open and get right in there. So you need to protect them, you know, and if you're letting them run free and then they can just go in and out through a small opening, well, that opening, if it's ground level, could also be an opening that a raccoon will go in and steal eggs and maybe kill the chickens, or the fisher will go in there, or even the coyote. So the coyote, we're creating a lot of the problems with it, and a lot of it is people. And again, we've moved into their environment. You know, we've taken over the woods, we've cleaned out, you know, so many towns have good conservation, and sometimes people say, oh, gee, you know, our taxes are going up, why don't we develop that land? And, you know, developing that land is where the wildlife's staying, and it's so important to keep them there. You know, you start developing too much, and now the wildlife starts to come into the local backyards and things where you don't want them in. Coyotes too, again, for somebody like me that has a small dog. I mean, I have a 6-foot fenced yard, so I'm protecting my animal, but, you know, you have like only a 3 or 4 foot fence, and you've got a small dog or a cat in your backyard, a coyote can jump that fence. It can jump a 3 or 4 foot fence.
And they come out, they are not only nocturnal, are they?
No, they really aren't. And again, a lot of that is when food's available to them. And they are opportunistic feeders. They'll feed on anything, whether that's garbage that's been left behind. Again, the trash bags that are left out on the counter, a trash can that gets spilled, the dog food that's there. The animals will even eat other animals' fecal material if enough of it's left there, because it's not 100% digested, as disgusting as that may sound. So, you know, you need to clean up your area, patrol it, make sure, and watch for things. You know, if you have a shed, and one of the best things you can do, and I had to do this with my own shed, because before I had the dachshund, we had a mixed breed dog, and an opossum came into the yard, and the possum went under the shed. And the dog belly crawled under the shed after the opossum, and I couldn't get that dog out of there. We had to coax it out with food finally to get it out. But the opossum got far enough under the shed that the dog couldn't get any farther. Well, I did some research, and one of the best things you can do is screen in that whole bottom of the shed. So my shed is up on cinder blocks. So what we did is I went to the local store, I got some good heavy mesh screening, good galvanized screening, and I tacked it to the side of the shed, and then I dug a trench around the outside of that shed down 1.5 feet. And then I pushed that screening from the shed down into the soil 1 foot to 1.5 feet and elbowed it away. So now any animal that tries to dig to get under my shed can't dig under there. They keep hitting the screening, they just get kind
frustrated and leave.
Exactly. So it's a good way to keep animals out from under your sheds, because our sheds and our decks are places where it's natural hiding animals for animals. You know, and particularly, you know, you have a skunk, you know, and it gets under your deck, and all of a sudden you want to go out at night to relax on the chair and look at the stars or something, and that skunk comes out. It's not going to be a good experience for you.
How can people prevent skunks from coming into the house?
Yeah, that's one of the things that people do sometimes, and a skunk will take advantage of this, is they put the pet doors on their doors. They flap open, and that's enough room for a skunk or a raccoon to get in very easily.
They just walk in.
Right, they just walk right in. And sometimes they follow the animal in. You know, they see the animal walk through the door, and it's like, ugh. You know, and you gotta be very careful with those. But around your house, some of the things you can do, again, is keep the plantings nice, neat, and trim. You can use sprays like coyote urine and fox urine that you could spray periodically around the areas of your house. If you think a skunk is living under your shed or under your deck and you see an area that looks like it's been kind of dug out, both of those creatures are nighttime creatures. The opossum, the skunk, the raccoon, they're nighttime creatures. So what I usually tell people to do is during the day, late in the afternoon, get some talcum powder or flour and sprinkle it all around that opening. And then go out about 9 o'clock at night with a flashlight and look and see. And if you see track marks leaving out, now you know that animal's left. So you could take a rag and soak it in bleach or soak it in ammonia. You don't combine bleach and ammonia, that's a bad thing. That creates chlorine gas. But bleach or ammonia, either one, soak a couple of rags in it, push them with a broom handle or a rake handle under that area of the porch. They're not going to want to go back in there. And then you push it in just far enough so you can get it back out when you want to get it back out. Eventually it dissipates. And people sometimes ask, well, why don't I just pour the bleach down there? Because it absorbs into the soil and eventually it dissipates very quickly. The rag is going to hold that smell there for a while. So even if the skunk comes back or the raccoon comes back, the next night, and it's like, oh, it still smells under here. I don't want to go under there. That'll work really well.
We have had in Swansea, and I only am talking about Swansea, but we have had deer, a lot of deer.
The deer
and
populations
deer
are
ticks.
up. Yes. And the deer ticks are carried not only by deer, but by mice and small animals, even raccoons and opossums and things like that. But the deer populations have exploded. And they've changed some of the hunting regulations to kind of thin out some of the herds. But again, we've made it easy for the deer. We've created nice yards with nice flowers and plantings. And I see people call up and complain all the time that deer are eating all their plants and things. One of the things you can do, again, is use that coyote urine in that area. And they make deer repellents that you can also spray around the yards to help keep the deer away. I've had people tell me, and I don't have any deer in my area, so I've never had to do it, but people say, and they say, you have to use this, and I know you're not supposed to, but Irish Spring soap, they slice it, and they put it in like pantyhose or something, and they hang it amongst their plants. And the smell of it deters the deer.
It repels them.
Repels them a little bit. Peppermint oil is another natural repellent for a lot of animals. A lot of animals don't. You got to buy the pure peppermint oil, and I cut it a little bit. I use it a little bit around my house. And the peppermint oil you cut and you spray with like a spritz bottle that you can buy. You mix it with a little bit of water and you spray it. One of the big problems we're having now with mice and chipmunks and things, getting in people's cars. They get up inside the motor and they gnaw on the wires and they make nesting in there. And just think of how much of our car is electronic now. How much of it is powered, the seats, the windows, the air conditioning, the heat, the computer-generated stuff on your dashboard. You might have a GPS in it and things like that, the radios and stereos. Well, they found out, and there was actually a class action lawsuit against Toyota and a number of manufacturers. They were coating the wires, and I guess it was to be more ecologically good, but they never told anybody, with soy. So the rodents were chewing on the wires for nourishment. And they would literally shorting out. I mean, sometimes people get thousands of dollars worth of damage. And not to mention the rodents get in there. After a while, they start, even if they're not gnawing on the wires, they get into the car because in the winter months, in the fall, when it's cold, if you've been out driving around a little bit and you don't park your car in a garage, you park it in your driveway or in your yard, that car is radiating heat. And the small animals, they sense that. And they'll use the tires to climb up, get inside the wheel wells, get into the motor, and all of a sudden they're creating a problem in there. And they're dragging food up in there and acorns and things like that. And I've had people say they open up their air intake and it's like they pop the hood and there's all twigs and acorns and all kinds of things in there that the animals have dragged up.
Fascinating.
They really do. They create a lot of problems. But, some of it, again, the animals just doing what they're just looking for a warm place to stay.
So what other wildlife concerns should we be aware of?
Yeah, in some areas of southern New England now, they're starting to have a problem with bobcats. And the bobcat is a version of it looks like a big cat, only the tail is bobbed. It's a small tail, big ears, very fast. And again, an animal that'll prey on small dogs, prey on cats, but they're normally eating things like rabbits and mice and rodents. That's what they normally feed on. But a cat coming into the area, because the bobcat's going to weigh about 30 pounds. So it's a good-sized animal, not one you're going to want to get close to, just like matter of fact, the bobcat is one of the few things that will actually go after a fisher, too. Because the fisher, remember, the weasel family is much smaller than the bobcat, so occasionally they will go after those, too.
And where do you find bobcats?
Usually in wooded areas, heavily wooded areas, and areas that are
like
almost...
the western part of Rhode Island?
Rhode Island, yes, and particularly in Smithfield, North Smithfield, there's a population. I've been told out in Western Coventry, too, there's another small population of them. And even the other night I'm watching the news, and what comes on the news but a bear, black bear, that was in Coventry, Rhode Island. And they were actually, DEM issued a warning telling people to take in their bird feeders in those areas, because the bears are coming out of hibernation, they're very hungry. And the black bear is normally just a vegetarian. It feeds on seeds and berries and nuts and things like that. So our bird feeders, our suet cakes and the bird feeders, that's like natural food for the bear. And in this video, it's on NBC 10. This bear just bent over one of those shepherd's hooks to get at the bird feeder, and then broke the bird feeder open. It was just there feeding on everything. So I love the fact that we're getting a lot of wildlife. That we get a chance to see it, that we've never seen it before, that like I said, years ago when we grew up, bear in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, no, there were no bear, unless you went up maybe to the Berkshires or something. There were no deer in our area. Another thing that bothers people sometimes are turkeys. Turkeys have now become a problem.
We live on the other side of Swansea, and there's loads of turkeys.
And they can create a problem in your yards with defecation. They can be very territorial, particularly the male during mating season. But also, one of the problems we have, believe it or not, and you can talk to car dealers, particularly if you have a new shiny car, like a black one in particular, that male turkey, or even sometimes the female in mating season, sees its reflection, and it'll go and start pecking at the car. And we had a gentleman called Big Blue Bug Solutions, wanted to know what we could do for turkeys. It's not a whole lot you can do for them, but he had over $800 in damage done to one of his doors on his car from the turkey just pecking at it and scratching it, and he had to have it repainted. He had a nice car and had to have it repainted. So some of the wildlife do create problems. They're wonderful to look at, but you can occasionally get a problem with it. But I'm one more that tends to like to live one with the wildlife, even at my bird feeders in the backyard when I feed the birds. And that's another thing. If you have bird feeders, don't put the bird feeders on the house. Now you're dragging that seed right to your house. Birds are sloppy eaters. They'll spill some of that seed on the ground. It's going to be attractive to mice and other rodents, bringing them right to the house. I put my bird feeders in my backyard where I can easily see them, but away from my house. And even the squirrels that come to the bird, I throw peanuts out for the squirrels away from my house. Not near. I keep my trees trimmed so that squirrels can't jump onto the house or aren't climbing up the house.
Are squirrels a problem?
They are when they get in people's homes, because they'll get into the attic areas in particular, and they'll take up residence in there. They'll raise their young, and they will gnaw on wires. They can create fires. As a matter of fact, the National Pest Management Association estimates that about 10% of the fires, when you're watching or listening to a local news broadcast and they say, we had a fire at this location, it's of unknown origin. 10% of those fires are caused by rodents, mice, rats, and squirrels, and other vermin in people's house gnawing on the wires. So they get in there, they create a spark in the insulation, and all of a sudden a fire starts. Or you have spark and you've got storage upstairs in your attic area. So when squirrels get into your attic, they will rip at things that you have stored. Maybe you store your Christmas decorations up there, or other seasonal decorations, or maybe you store some clothing up there. They will tear that stuff apart, making a nest. They're not doing it maliciously. They're using it for a reason. They're tearing it apart for nesting material. But squirrels, rats, mice, they're members of the rodent family, and that means they have two incisors, and they have to gnaw constantly to keep those teeth filed down. If they didn't, those teeth would literally grow around almost like an elephant's tusk backwards. They wouldn't be able to feed. So a lot of times people say, I can hear that squirrel upstairs, or that mouse, he's scratching at my floor. Now he's probably gnawing at the rafter, just gnawing to keep the teeth filed down.
So maybe it's a good thing to get some peanuts, raw peanuts, and put them out.
Away
from the house.
Never feed anything close to the house. Never bring them up on your deck, because you want to watch them and you put peanuts on your deck. It's a bad thing, again, when you start bringing wildlife too close to your house. When they're in your yard, that's a natural environment for them. Squirrels are naturally living in our trees. The birds are naturally in our trees. Feed them in the yard is no problem, as long as it's away from the house. It's when you're bringing them to the house that's when you create your problems. Remember, a mouse only needs a hole 1/4 of an inch to get in your house. We use the hang ten sign from Hawaii that the little finger is the size of a mouse can get into your house, the thumb of a rat can get into your house. So it doesn't need a lot of room, just a small opening, and they can get into your home.
Foxes.
Yeah, foxes are a cool animal. They normally are not problems in people's homes. They normally do not attack our animals unless it's a female defending. But they will, again, get under our sheds, get under our deck, because it's a natural area. They like caves, hollow logs, and things like that. So this, again, goes to maybe putting up that screening around the outside of your deck, around the outside of that shed area, and bury it in the ground so nothing can dig underneath it. Bury it down. There's a fox, again, not a lot of enemies, maybe coyotes possibly, so maybe a little coyote urine or some of the other animal repellents, or just spraying the bleach or the ammonia underneath your shed area or underneath your deck area will help keep things out a little bit.
And wildlife should never be fed.
No, that's the key thing. It's against the law to feed wildlife, and it is against the law to trap wildlife and relocate them to another area, unless you're a professional rehabilitator or a professional wildlife trapper. But most of the time, they do not want the animal relocated. And I always wondered why, why not have a hot trap? And have a hot means you're saving the animal, you're relocating it. But it was explained to me by a wildlife biologist that relocating that animal to a brand new area is actually crueler to that animal. It doesn't have a home to live in, it doesn't know where it's going to get its food, and it can easily be exposed to a predator. So usually when wildlife is trapped, it has to be humanely euthanized.
Like raccoons.
Like raccoons, right, exactly. If we at Big Blue Bug Solutions trapped a raccoon in your house or your yard or a skunk or something, we have to euthanize them.
Humanely.
Humanely, yes. We have a chamber that humanely puts them to sleep.
So I know at my own house a couple of years ago, I had someone who had to come and exterminate the baby raccoons.
Yep.
They have to be exterminated.
They do.
Humanely.
It's the law. That's what, and that's also to prevent like the spread of rabies and things like that. Because you don't know if the mother raccoon had rabies and transferred it to the babies. Now you say, well, just take those babies. We'll set them free over here. They'll be fine. And now all of a sudden they give rabies to another species. Rabies is a very real thing. Woodchucks are another animal that carries rabies, and they're another animal that will get under our sheds. And if you have a garden in your yard, oh boy, that woodchuck, that's like a buffet, setting the buffet out for the woodchuck.
I am just being told that episode number 83 is coming to an end.
It went so quick.
This went so quickly, but it was great to see you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
You have given us so much good food for thought.
Thank you so much.
We hope that it's going to help a lot of people.
Well, that's what we try to do.
Very happy to have you. We'll have to have you come back again.
I would love to come back anytime.
Thank you for coming, and thanks for watching for Fins and Feathers.